Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Always Bring a Book. On today's episode, I got to chat with the amazing horror author and fellow Bostonian Eric LaRocca. We discuss his new book, Wretch, which comes out today on March 24th, so make sure to buy that at your local indie as soon as you're done listening to this interview. In addition to his new book, we also talk about queerness and horror, how he continues to push boundaries, and the importance of cover art in publishing. I'll play a short clip from the Wretch audiobook and then roll the interview. As always, stick around afterwards for some book recommendations.
After I collect my belongings, a few exquisitely framed photographs of Jonathan, a stress toy in the shape of a small mushroom, I pass my work computer to IT support, a middle-aged man named Walter who constantly carries a sour musk with him wherever he goes. He accepts the gift with little gratitude, almost incensed I caused more work for him due to my own stupidity. He doesn't wish me well on my way. Instead, he forces a half-hearted grunt and then returns his attention to his computer screen, typing a lengthy email to someone. The whole ordeal feels so anticlimactic. When things come to an end, you expect fanfare. You might expect finality or, at the very least, a semblance of hope that things might soon get better. But instead, everything around me seems to soften with a sort of hazel-colored blur, almost like I was perpetually existing in some well-worn antique photograph. I devoted so much of myself to this company over the 5 years I worked here. Even Jonathan knew that when he was alive. He'd argue with me sometimes and say that I cared too deeply about what others thought of me, especially work colleagues. But it was all in jest. I know he wasn't truly upset with me. He'd pretend to be sometimes, of course. He'd cross his arms and feign disgust, excusing himself to the other room. But eventually I'd follow, and I'd urge him to make up with a kiss on the cheek. I feel a hollow ache in the pit of my stomach. It feels so surreal to leave the office for what I know will be the final time.
Today's guest is Eric LaRocca, Bram Stoker Award finalist and author of Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, and many more, including Wretch, which comes out a month from today on March 24th. Welcome to the podcast, Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here and chat with you.
Yes, thanks for joining me on this post-blizzard apocalypse here.
I know, Boston. Yeah, we gotta dig ourselves out of this one, unfortunately.
Why we live here, I don't know. But I want to start with Wretch. I've loved watching like the rollout of it on like your socials and all that. The cover animation is beautiful, and I've seen the packages with like handles and stuff going out to reviewers. I love seeing the blurbs calling it a masterpiece about the exquisite pain of suffering in the face of loss and saying grief is only the beginning. So can you first tell us what Wretch is about and why grief is so intertwined in the story?
Yeah, so Wretch is about a man who suffers the loss of his husband to cancer. And in the process of grieving this traumatic loss, he discovers this support group known as the Wretches. And they are this small group of people that take photographs of like inanimate objects and hope to find images, messages from their departed loved ones in these photographs. And through them, he is connected with a very strange figure known as Porcelain Caw. And Porcelain offers kind of like supernatural last moments with the departed loved one in question, whoever you're grieving. But this reunion comes at a very strong, very unpleasant cost, unfortunately. And that's kind of like the elevator pitch for Wretch. But as far as like why grief figures so heavily in this book and just like my work in general, grief has always been a really like sordid, sort of like unpleasant topic for me. I went through a really traumatic loss when I was really young. I lost a very dear friend of mine to breast cancer, and it was really destabilizing to see them sort of like wither away in front of me and lose them like in real time. And that loss was so sorry to like get off on such a heavy
No, no, this
topic.
is I almost forgot we were doing a podcast. I'm just listening. I'm like, I'm enthralled. So
Yeah, so I this loss was like very sobering for me and also like really it kind of like defined me for a few years. Like I was just so attached and so drawn to this person. And they were a wonderful actor, were on stage and in film, and were a huge mentor to me. And that loss really shaped me and changed me. And it's interesting. I was recently asked in another interview how I view grief, and if I view it as something noble or rather something that's sort of unpleasant and like filthy and rotted. And I think that question really struck me in the face and was like, "Yeah, I've never viewed grief as something that's noble.
mm,
It's something that tethers all of us together. It makes us kind of realize like the true extent of our humanity. But it's not something that I ever viewed as noble or righteous. I viewed it more as like unclean and unpleasant. And I think that's why I explore it so much in my horror novels, because to me, grief is quite horrifying.
yeah.
And the lengths that we go to in order to grieve properly or grieve in maybe unconventional unhealthy ways, those are really upsetting for me to think about. I'm someone who fantasizes a lot about losing people because of that loss I suffered so early on. And I probably shouldn't say fantasize because that implies like a wishing for it, but like a yearning for it. But maybe dread is like a more appropriate word. Like I dread the loss of others in my life. I dread the loss of like my boyfriend or my parents, and I know that these things are inevitable and they're part of the human experience. But for me, grief, it touches all of us, unfortunately, throughout our life, and it is that inevitable thing that kind of binds us all together. And uh, makes us recognize our humanity, our humaneness. But it is decidedly unpleasant, I feel, in a lot of ways, and that's why I really wanted to explore it in this book in particular. And I've explored it in other books, like "At Dark I Become Loathsome." I
Mm.
is a novel that was released last year, and I kind of view Wretch as like a sibling of that book, in that it's about the same sort of things that I'm obsessed with, like cancer and death and rot and entropy and decay.
I mean, it's how Burnt Sparrow starts too, right? He's grieving the loss of his mother and the relationship he used to have with his father, right? Like it's very
Exactly.
different in that post
I
loss
just
world.
I just think it's really it's obviously I feel like it's awful to experience in real life, but in fiction and film, literature, it's an interesting thing to play with. I feel like it provides I feel like it resonates with a lot of people.
I mean, everyone goes through it, right? Or even if they haven't yet, there is that dread, right? Like my parents are getting older, and just like you, I wouldn't say fantasize, but I do dread that inevitable moment, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm definitely someone who thinks about that, who like ruminates on that quite a bit. So I think that's why that thing that the presence of grief figures really significantly in a lot of my works. Even like what you mentioned, Burnt Sparrow, and We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. It's not like the heart of that book isn't necessarily grief. It's more so the trauma of the violence that occurs on Christmas morning in that very small town in isolated New Hampshire. But there is the grief of the aftermath and the struggle of moving on. Um,
Yeah, I remember at one point and this isn't giving anything away for people that haven't read it, but he's looking and I think he sees like a brooch or something on one of the dead,
mhm.
and like even though he wasn't close with this woman, he like remembers, and there is that like
Yeah.
shared moment. So thanks for that answer. What are you hoping readers sort of walk away from this book, thinking or feeling or
It's difficult to say because I never want to be like prescriptive. I never want to
Feel this way.
feel this way because I
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
like the readers are going to feel however they're going to feel. That being said, I can tell you the works that inspire me and influence me make me feel very unclean after having viewed and read whatever I'm digesting. So books like Exquisite Corpse or The Atrocity Exhibition by J.G. Ballard or Crash by J.G. Ballard or the Books of Blood by Clive Barker or Frisk by Dennis Cooper, I feel like rotted and like filthy and yeah, I just feel like destabilized in a way, and I love that. I
Yeah.
feel like you're about to say something, so I want to. I don't want
I
to.
was going to ask if you've read the books by Alison Rumfitt, because that's when you said feeling unclean after you read it. Their books, both of them. I think one's called Brainworms, and I forget what the other
Yeah,
one is called. But
tell me I'm worthless.
yeah,
Yeah.
those books made me feel pretty exactly how you're explaining.
Yeah, I love Allison, and I was lucky enough to read Brainworms early and blurb it.
Oh, that's so
So
funny. I'm
yeah,
like, have you heard
so
of this book that you literally blurbed?
yeah, no, I love her work. She's amazing. So yeah, I love anything that makes me feel like off kilter, anything that makes me feel like I'm seeing the world a little differently. And films do that for me as well. So anything by like David Cronenberg or Takashi Miike
Mm,
or Lars von Trier, like The House That Jack Built, is such an unpleasant, upsetting film. That definitely kind of mutated my view of like other people on the street and just like walking by someone and thinking like, oh, I wonder what's going on inside their head. So I think if I had to say what I would love for people to feel like after reading this book is I would like them to feel a little like unpleasant and a little bit
wow,
grotesque.
thanks, Eric.
Yeah. And filthy and all
Yeah.
those things. I don't know. I've always been drawn to books that have that sort of energy to them, that have like this sort of darkness to them that you can't like you need like a shower after you read or watch them.
Yeah,
Um I love that. That's always just really excited me as a writer and as a consumer of media.
full same. I actually want to move into that. So you mentioned liking that type of media, both in your own writing, but in movies and film and other books. And I feel like your work is known for that, right? It's known for pushing boundaries and its themes and graphic nature a lot of the times and concepts. And I've seen you talk about your editor was like pushing back on a certain scenes, like, hey, maybe we should like hint at this instead of actually show it. And you kind of had to push back a little bit and say like, no, this scene's important to show. And how do you personally decide like where that line is, and how do you keep finding ways to sort of like move the goalpost so it stays exciting for you and your readers?
I mean, it's natural for me to kind of push the boundaries and push that goalpost further and further. And it's really my editor that kind of reins me in and is like,
Mm.
we really can't do this. We can't cross this line. Readers are gonna tap out if you do this, if you have a character do this, or even more recently, like the big box stores won't stock this book if we have this scene in there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's been really eye-opening, like, being in publishing. I've only been in the industry for, like, the past 4 or 5 years, but I feel like I've gotten, like, a crash course in publishing and writing transgressive extreme horror and what works behind the scenes and what doesn't work behind the scenes. Like, there are some things that like, Barnes& and Noble, for instance, like, won't stock.
I had no clue about that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, like there's some things that you just can't put in a book, because maybe like the big box store like won't stock it.
You would imagine huge publishers, like Simon and Schuster, would have like kind of more weight to throw around there. Like, if you're not going to stock this book, then like you can't stock our other books. Like, I'm really surprised at that.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting to sort of navigate that as someone who loves to push the envelope and loves to cross boundaries. It's been it's been challenging in a lot of ways because they're like the second book of Burnt Sparrow, for instance, is coming out later this year in September. And there were like so many moments during the editorial process where my editor was like, we really can't do
Wow.
this. Like, we're never going to get books ordered. Like, no one's going to stock this book because of the graphic nature of the content. And I had to do like a serious page one rewrite of the second book of that trilogy because of how graphic and how extreme it was. And that's like, I should preface like the book that we're talking about today, Wretch, is not that extreme and not that graphic. It's more like somber and more like reflective, and it ruminates on like grief and loss and love and all those things. But the Burnt Sparrow trilogy is very much fixed in that sort of tradition of like splatterpunk and
Mm.
transgressive horror fiction. And with the second book, I was really just trying to like experiment and see how far I could go. And can't go that far, unfortunately.
Yeah, I find that so surprising because I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I watch a lot of horror movies, and I'm thinking of movies like, I mean, even bigger ones like Terrifier, right? I don't know if you've
Mhm.
seen that, I assume, but
Yeah.
like that's pretty graphic, and that was like in theaters,
Mhm.
and there's even more like indie stuff that's even crazier. So I'm really surprised to hear that. Granted,
It's
I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen all the Terrifier films, but um I will say like anything involving children is pretty much like, especially what's going on now with like the Epstein files, like
Yep. Yep.
it's people just don't want to read that, and they don't want to see it in film. They don't want to read about it. They don't want to watch it. So it's just like kind of a universal no to stuff like that.
So you mentioned transgressive, and I wanted to move into genre for a second. And I know you've talked about this a ton, but I find it to be so interesting as a huge horror fan, both in books and movies. And horror has always kind of had a complicated relationship with queerness and representation. And how have you seen that relationship evolve in your own work, or the genre as a whole over the last, 5 or 6 years or whatever?
Yeah, when I first started reading in like high school and college, when I first started reading horror, just horror fiction, like I was reading obviously Clive Barker, Poppy Z. Bright, David J. Shaw, like all the big splatterpunks, Richard Lehman. There were some elements of queerness in those stories, and there was like some queer representation, obviously with Clive Barker being an openly gay man, Poppy Z. Bright transitioning to Billy Martin. There were elements of queerness in those stories, but there wasn't the sort of like bombastic representation, like the amazingness of what we have now with queer literature, queer horror specifically. It's almost like every time I turn around every week there's a new book dropping, and it's a queer horror novel or queer horror novella, a book written by a queer horror author, and it's so wonderful to see those changes. There was a book recently released called Of Beasts by M. Jane Warma, and she's a Brooklyn-based horror author. That book is so amazing, such a brilliant little novella, and um, very much like in my wheelhouse of like kind of like messy, complicated, problematic queer
Mhm.
representation, but I love it so much, and I love that book so much. And I mean, I can think of tons of others. There's like Moonflow by Bitter Corella that came out last year. It just got nominated for the Stoker Award for Best First Novel.
My to be read pile is not going to survive this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like so many. And then like we mentioned Alison Rumfitt. She's wonderful with Tell Me I'm Worthless and Brainworms. David Demchuk is another amazing horror author. He's from Canada, and he wrote a really incredible book called Red X, which is
Mm.
getting reissued by Soho Press, I believe, later this year. Um, and yeah, that features an introduction by Gretchen Felker Martin, who's another awesome queer horror author. So I feel like we're in this like beautiful renaissance of
Yeah.
queer horror lit, and it's so lovely to see and so wonderful. I really do hope it continues to thrive, and I think it will because I think horror is inherently queer no matter what you say. Like horror is such a inherently queer genre because it's about the other. It's
Yep.
about otherness, it's about the outsider. And we are the outsiders. You know, we are not the norm. We are definitely considered the other. Um, but I kind of love that. I love being thought of as the other. I love being different. And I didn't always love it. Like I had a lot of internalized homophobia that I needed to work through to get to this place of accepting and embracing being the other. But honestly, horror helped educate me and helped kind of reconfigure the structure of my thoughts and my thinking to embrace myself as what I am. Uh, because it's a genre for the freaks, I feel like, you know?
Definitely. Well, I almost didn't ask this question because you've been asked about it quite frequently, but I'm really glad I asked you now. You just mentioned it, writing kind of messy or even evil queer characters, and I forget where I read it. Maybe it was like Nightmare Magazine or something that people were almost upset initially, right? They wanted like the lesbian romance
Oh,
book.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
upset about everything.
Yeah. So how do you tackle that, I guess? Like how do you write the characters that you want to write knowing that you might get that kind of, pushback from readers or people that aren't upset when you are trying to sell books, right? Like how do you navigate that, especially on like bigger presses now?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, with bigger presses comes a bigger team that can kind of vet the material that you're writing and can challenge and be like, this might get interpreted the wrong way, or we should maybe modify this. That being said, at the end of the day, I'm going to write whatever I want to write. And if it sells, it sells. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. I had no idea Things Have Gotten Worse was going to take off the way it did. It was such a niche book. It was so specific and so rooted in like 90s, early 2000s internet kind of vibes. And just I can't explain why that book took off the way it did. I
I
think
was just going to ask too.
it
Like
was
what
like the
was it?
perfect storm. It was just like the perfect storm of like that beautiful cover art by Kim Jacobson, that really provocative title. Um, and then I think like people love nostalgia. I think
Yeah.
people like are drawn to anything like early 2000s, early aughts, late 90s, anything like in that era. So I think it really tapped into that. And also like it was right kind of post COVID and we were all kind of living in these online spheres.
Yeah.
So people I think were really drawn to the book for that reason too. Um, but that being said, I'm going to write whatever I want to write. And people are going to take issue with anything. You will never please everybody
Yeah.
with anything you write. You will always offend somebody. Um, you just have to find the right people to offend. You don't want to offend the wrong people.
So you just gave me the perfect segue here, about title and cover art. Again, I read somewhere that the title of a piece is really important to you, that you sometimes can't even fully get into something before you have at least a working title. And that I love that you're just understanding that a cover art is important, right? I'm as guilty as the next person. Do you know how many books are on my shelf that I picked up just because the cover was beautiful?
Yeah.
More than I'd like to admit. I guess, like, one, can you explain like your naming process? Because I just found it so interesting. And then two, what is your involvement with cover art? Do you work with a specific artist? How is your involvement there, especially with your knowledge that it is important?
Yeah, I mean, for me, cover art is the ultimate. Like, it is what sells your book. It is what people first see when they spot it on the shelf. And you want something that draws people, that excites and maybe mystifies and beguiles in some way. But you want something that is provocative in some way. And you want something that is like visually arresting. And for me, I've had a lot of luck working in the smaller press in the indie space, being able to select what kind of cover art I wanted and the vibes I wanted to convey. Um, so the cover for Things Have Gotten Worse since we last spoke, I picked that one out from
Mm.
Kim Jacobson's amazing like collection that he painted. Um, and I was like, this, we have to go with this painting. And my publisher at the time was like, oh my God, it's like the most I've ever spent on commissioning a cover artwork, but we'll do it. And it turned out to be a great investment,
Yeah.
because it worked out really, really well. That painting is so striking. And then more recently, like A Dark I Become Loathsome, I really wanted to work with Sarah Sitkin, who's an amazing LA-based designer artist. And I went through her portfolio and really like loved the piece that we ended up using for that cover art. I thought that was really striking. But for a book like Wretch, it's really fascinating because working at the bigger publishers like Simon and Schuster, Saga Press, you don't have that much autonomy when it comes
Mm.
to selecting cover art. That being said, my editor at Saga, named Tim O'Connell, is like a genius and so brilliant. And he kept a lot of the cover art that was being submitted, like by the designer, he kept those from me and was like, we're not ready yet. Like, this isn't the one. This isn't the one. This isn't the one. And then finally, when we landed on the cover, that was Wretch. That's like the final cover. He's like, okay, I'm going to show this to Eric. I trust him so much. He has like the most impeccable taste on the planet. So it's all about like, you're going to sacrifice some things by signing with a larger press, but
Mm.
if you find an editor that really gets your vision and your aesthetic, you're set.
That's awesome. And I think, like you said, it nailed it. I love the cover of Wretch. And there's something also just about the like short, big, bold name of it on the shelf is going to just stand out so well. It's
Yeah,
really
and then
beautiful.
to answer your question about titles, titles are obviously super important to me as well. And I kind of I whenever I title something, I kind of like to think about those old Giallo films from like the 70s and 80s. Like your vice is a locked room and only I have a key, or don't torture a duckling, or all the colors of the dark. There are so many just like evocative Giallo titles that I think are just so arresting and so beautifully done. So I kind of go into that headspace just thinking like, what would be a really interesting Giallo title? And I kind of like to marry, obviously I love marrying like the poetic with the grotesque,
Yep.
and the sumptuous, the decadent with the ugly and the unpleasant. So I really love like the title process is one of my favorite parts of writing. I love the titling process and I love the cover art process. I feel like both of those are really just like where I'm really shining.
I have one last question. So I this one's maybe a little self-serving, but I love seeing this little horror crew of writers that you hang out with. I see these photos of like a bunch of my favorite authors at like dinner together and stuff. And I'm thinking people like Rachel Harrison and Nat Cassidy and Paul Tremblay, and it's got to be awesome to have a group like that to lean on. And I was just wondering, how much do you guys collaborate or share drafts to get feedback, or is it just like a place to vent about the industry? Like, what does that little circle look like?
I mean, it's like all of the above, really.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, I met them kind of when I first started in the industry, like 2021, 2022, and we just like clicked and hit it off. And Paul was like one of the first major authors that really took an interest in me and kind of like took me under his wing.
Mm.
So I have a real like soft spot in my heart for Paul Tremblay. Um, not just because he's a phenomenal horror author and just author in general, but he's just like a wonderful person
He's so nice.
and just like such a lovely human being, and um, just so fun and fun to be around and amusing, just hilarious, really quick wit and wonderful sense of humor. Um, and then like Rachel and Nat and like Clay McLeod Chapman, even like, we're all like really close friends. And it's been great to have that support system behind me.
Yeah.
And like we're all there for each other. We all kind of get like the ups and downs of the industry, and um it's just been it's made it feel like less lonely because it is a really isolating industry and
Yeah.
business, and the act of writing in and of itself is very lonely, because it's just you in front of your keyboard, in front of your desktop monitor or your laptop, and you're just working on your story, you're working on your novel. So it's nice to have that outside perspective to kind of bring you back down to earth and make you remember, like, things aren't so bad. Like, I'm kind of a pessimist sometimes, so it's nice to have people to, like, remind me that, like, things are good, like, not everything
Yeah.
is terrible, it's all good.
Well, I'm glad you found your wretches.
Yeah.
I look forward to the anthology horror that you guys all put together eventually, you know?
Hell yeah.
Um, so I always end asking for I always call it one good thing. It doesn't have to be a book recommendation or anything like that. It's just anything in your life that is bringing you joy recently, that you think that we should all give a try.
I've really been loving, um, Ethel Cain lately, the artist. I don't know if you know of her.
Mm-mm.
She's an amazing singer-songwriter, and she has, like, the most just beautiful voice. Her lyrics are absolutely haunting, and she has a few albums out. One's called Preacher's Daughter that is really just amazing and beautiful. Another one called Perverts, which is, like, one of my favorites. It's, like, very ambient, like, drone sort of music, but,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, like, it's incredible, and then her latest release was Willoughby Tucker, I'll Always Love You, and that was a really lovely, just lovely soundscape to listen to. So, if you're into, like, Southern Gothic, I feel like she's a real, like, Southern Gothic heroine brought to life, you know?
Amazing. Well, thanks. I'll have to give that a listen.
Yeah, so I highly recommend. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I obviously you have Wretch coming out in about a month, but is there anything else that we should be on the lookout from you or any updates that we should know before we jump off?
Yeah, so the second book of Burnt Sparrow is coming out September 8th this year. I'm really excited about that. I've worked really hard on the rewrite for that book. So
It sounds
I,
like it, yeah.
yeah, so I really hope people love it as much as I love the new version of it. And then the paperback for We Are Always Tender with Our Dead comes out on the
Oh,
same
nice.
day.
That's awesome.
Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that. And then, Wretch comes out March 24th in a couple of weeks from now.
I see
So
your luggage behind you. We're about to hit the road there for
yeah, yeah. We're
yeah.
about to head out on a little tour. So
Nice. That's
um
amazing.
yeah, it's gonna be fun. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm glad I could grab you before you're out on the road and it was really, really nice to get to meet you.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to that interview, everyone. Even though I was lucky enough to snag an arc of Wretch from Saga, I plan on running to my local bookstore as soon as I'm done recording this and snagging a copy, and you should too. I've been on a bit of a horror kick recently, and I just finished Tradwife yesterday by Saratoga Schaefer. It came out about a month ago in February, and it's bloody, it's fast paced, and it's just a really all around fun read. It is a page turner. It's written in a very thriller esque way, so you can rip through this in a sitting or two. The story follows Camille, who recently left suburban life for a more rural, idyllic farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. She lives there with her religious tech bro husband who works in the city, and she has a social media following. I think they say it's like 40,000. So it's big, but it's started to plateau because everyone in her trad wife community has a baby. So naturally, she does what everyone would do. She makes a wish at a creepy, dilapidated well in the wheat field behind her house. And soon after, she's pregnant. But of course, things do not go according to plan. The cover of this book, if you haven't seen it, is black and red and features a silhouette of a woman with a shadowy, demonic hand on her pregnant belly. So that should give you an indication of how that wish went. I won't say much more because I don't want to spoil anything, especially since this one's new, but it's quick, entertaining, and honestly, I really loved the ending. So if you're into spooky horror, trad wife, creepy well type books, this one's for you. I chatted briefly with Saratoga and her publisher, and I am working on scheduling to have her on the podcast, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed this episode, consider giving it a follow so you know when new episodes come out. Thanks for listening.